She just flipped like a complete stranger.
I don't understand. I didn't conceal it. It was in the driveway.
He let her right into the house.
And I believed her until the evidence started to show something different.
I'm sleeping next to your murderer.
Deep down, she's really just a callous, cold-hearted killer.
I thought, what are we going to do?
Welcome, I'm Leila McKinnon and this is Inside Crime. Tonight we look at female scammers. Both staggering stories reveal the crazy lies told, the lengths they went to for money and the lives they destroyed in the process. One was the ultimate gold digger who preyed on lonely older men and weaseled her way into their hearts and bank accounts. But first, an outwardly sweet young woman who not only lied about horrific crimes against her innocent husband, but took down an entire family and their world with her. Dan Jones lived every man's nightmare. Falsely accused of rape by the woman who claimed to love him.
You've gone from meeting this innocent, sweet girl to this premeditated monster.
Sarah Jane Parkinson had a big smile and a little girl's voice.
When Daniel attacked me,
which hid a wicked heart.
hand on my heart, I know it was Daniel. I recognised him.
When her cunning web of lies brought down her fiancé,
She just flipped like a complete stranger.
she turned on his parents.
This was a battle. Identify your enemy, know who they are, marshal them, corral them, and finish them.
But police believed Parkinson's despicable claims.
The incarceration of someone is supposed to be the last resort of the law.
Dan Jones was thrown into jail.
His last words to me on that phone call were, "I love you, son," and I could hear his voice breaking.
The Jones family destroyed. It took one good cop to finally unmask this serial liar.
Sarah destroyed that family.
It all began back in 2011 when Dan Jones, then 25, met 20-year-old Sarah Jane Parkinson. He was an AFP officer working as a dog handler, and she was an airline employee. They fell in love and within months were planning their wedding and building a house.
She was very kind of girly and cute and innocent and very kind of a little bit old-fashioned as well. Like she always, dressed very nicely. She always wore, nice dresses and like frocks and all that kind of thing.
She was immaculate. Her dress, her appearance, her manners, everything was just perfect.
They don't come more solid than the Jones family. Michelle, a librarian, and Ian, a former Navy engineer, had been married 30 years and they wished the same for their son. The family welcomed Parkinson into their hearts and home, but within a year, they began to doubt Dan's dream girl. She didn't have friends, and her many stories about a troubled past worried them.
She was raped by apparently from one of her friend's fathers. And yeah, apparently there's been a few other boyfriends that have been abusive. She has had a bad run of boyfriends.
Any suspicions, though, were outweighed by sympathy, and Dan forged ahead with their plans together. But it all changed in 2012 when Sarah Jane Parkinson started a new job at Queanbeyan Police Station as a clerical assistant. She started staying out with work colleagues, and it's where she met her new lover, a New South Wales policeman. Parkinson soon began weaving an intricate web of lies, claiming that she was a victim of domestic violence. When Parkinson came to work with bruises, police said she told them Dan was abusing her. What she failed to mention was that she suffered a heart condition which made her dizzy and tunnel vision, all of which contributed to a series of household accidents and injuries.
She was always clumsy and we always kind of used to make a bit of a joke.
So every time she'd have like a fall or she'd hurt herself or walk into something, she'd laugh it off and it'd be just typical Sarah. That's just what she did.
But what she was doing was giving herself a bruise or a mark that she could then weave into her tale.
The first Dan knew that police were investigating him was nearly 2 years into their relationship, when Sarah Jane Parkinson's boss, Inspector Anthony Hill, called him to the police station for what he called a chat. Dan decided to take his dad, Ian, along with him, and what they told him was shocking.
They want to put a AVO against me for abusing Sarah. I was like, well, I haven't done anything. You know, I was furious. I'm sitting there going, for what? Inspector Hill said that he had 5 people that he would be willing to put up on the witness stand against me if I was to fight it. 5 witnesses to events that never took place. And she says she doesn't want to speak to you about it.
Daniel came back very agitated. Ian was quite angry.
I was starting to get the suspicion we'd let a rat into the house.
Parkinson blames her overprotective police colleagues for the AVO.
I actually queried her directly about it by herself, and she's, no, there's nothing. Daniel's never hurt me. I can't imagine he ever would. He loves me, I love him. She's an accomplished liar.
Dan and Parkinson continue their lives together. He knows he's innocent, but he's beginning to have other concerns. He suspects she might be cheating.
With, you know, some of the mobile phone messages and ringing and late at night, I said, so you're cheating on me? And her body language said it all. I was crushed, but I was more angry at the moment. I was just furious, you know. I just built a house, you know. She'd moved in with me, everything was going well. I had, you know, a good career. I had, you know, my dream car I always wanted. I had, you know, everything was going right. And on that instant, everything just went to shit.
The relationship ended in November 2013. Within days, Sarah Jane Parkinson comes to Canberra's Gungahlin police station to make more claims about Dan. This time, they're so extreme that to believe them is to believe Dan is a monster.
You don't get a chance to defend yourself. You're pretty much just going, didn't happen 32 times. And like some of the charges that get written out to you, like they're disgusting. Like, they're the worst allegations a guy can be, you know, charged with. Or it's filthy.
The allegations ranged from rape, striking her on the head with a lump of wood, a tyre lever, urinating on her, and that he forced her to stand outside in the rain.
I mean, they were horrific allegations, some of the worst of, you know, in the domestic violence you'd see.
And that just makes me furious. You've gone from, you know, meeting this innocent, sweet girl to this premeditated monster who's capable of making all these allegations against you without a care in the world. And you just sit there and go, who's this person? She just flipped. She was like a complete stranger.
On Christmas Eve 2013, Dan's world falls apart. He was at work at the corrections centre as a prison officer, and as he's leaving to go home, he's arrested in front of his colleagues and then charged with 32 counts of domestic violence, including rape. He cannot believe it. Dan has lost nearly everything: his home, his job, and his reputation. He's virtually under house arrest at his parents' while Parkinson lives in his house. His bail conditions are so strict, one breach and he'll lose his freedom.
You just completely lost, helpless, confused. Everything's just going around in your head. Like, it was me against the whole AFP. It was pretty much me against any person in a blue uniform at that point.
The Jones family realised they were under siege, and that it wasn't only Sarah Jane Parkinson they had to worry about. It seemed police believed every word she uttered.
So I got the family together and I said, we are in the fight of our lives. The consequences to Daniel, if this runs the way it's looking it's going, he's going to end up in jail for 18 to 20 years. I went on, well, I'll use the term war footing. Everything was about achieving my goal, which was proving Daniel innocent and having Sarah Jane and the police held to account. This was a battle. That's how I treated it.
If there was a battle, the front line was here, the Australian Federal Police Station at Gungahlin. It's here that Sarah Jane Parkinson found a willing ear. In particular, AFP Acting Sergeant Scott Corcoran. He was the first to investigate the allegations against Dan. Corcoran has since left the force. Within a month of Dan's arrest, Ian too found himself slapped with a court order. One breach of that order and he could also be sent to jail, something he believed Parkinson was aiming for.
We were literally besieged.
And while the Jones family lived under siege, Sarah Jane Parkinson set up her new life with her policeman lover, taking up residence in the home Dan had built.
And I was paying for a mortgage for him and his 3 kids to live in my house. They had everything I ever worked for, and I had nothing.
For this family that had only ever done things by the book, Parkinson's next move was incomprehensible. On March 21st, 2014, a posse of police officers arrived at the Joneses' home to arrest Dan.
They just jumped the gate and just slammed Daniel up against the wall here. So there were 4 men on top of Daniel making the arrest.
And I had no idea what was going on. They didn't tell me I was being arrested. They didn't tell me what for.
I thought, here we go. Today's the day. This is where it starts.
Dan Jones was charged with yet another sexual assault of his wife, Sarah Jane Parkinson. A story she would add more and more shocking detail to over the coming week. Parkinson's final account was of a violent and horrific rape. And utterly untrue. What no one realised was that this photograph of Dan holding his nephew Hunter was proof he couldn't have done it. It was taken earlier on the day of his arrest by his sister-in-law. Crucially stamped with date, time and location, it showed Dan could not have been anywhere near Parkinson at the time she claimed he'd raped her. Yet Dan faced the court fighting for his freedom.
I can remember seeing him handcuffed and looking over his shoulder at us. It became a habit of mine to go, chin up, shoulders back, chin up.
So serious was the charge of rape that Dan, a former prison officer, was denied bail and sent to Australia's toughest jail, Goulburn's Supermax. The former prison officer in a jail that houses the worst of the worst.
Probably the worst day of our lives, that one. The taking of someone's freedom is supposed to be the last act. Daniel was banged up so fast it wasn't funny. And if anyone found out who he was while he was in there, he was dead.
I got one phone call. I spoke to Dad and he said, we'll get through this and everything. And his last words to me on that phone call were, I love you, son. And I could hear his voice breaking. He's the strongest guy I know, and if he was struggling to get through it, then how was I expected to do the same?
Outside the jail, his family is desperately trying to free him and undo the damage done by the woman who once claimed to love him, Sarah Jane Parkinson. But this was not the first time Parkinson has accused an innocent man of rape.
She'd made me feel as though I was guilty of everything she'd said, everything.
10 years ago, Parkinson accused Keith Lewis of raping her and threatening to kill her and her family. They were extraordinary allegations because at the time, Parkinson's best friend was Keith Lewis's daughter, Sarah.
This is a girl who I trusted my life with, and why would she lie? But my dad wouldn't do that. But why would someone lie?
I felt like my heart had been ripped out, and I was looking at people thinking, what are they judging me? That's what my thoughts were, and I remember going to the bedroom and just bawling my eyes out, just thinking about this. What do I do here?
But Parkinson's hideous claims didn't end there. She also accused Keith of sexually assaulting his own daughters, Sarah and Rebecca, and abusing other girls at their school. Accusations that were all lies, but devastating for this family.
My dad said to me, he held me and he cried and he said, I didn't touch her. And he was crying, and to me that was the most heartbreaking thing that you would ever have to see or hear from your dad. This strong, stoic Navy, person that I've always looked up to hold you, bawling his eyes out, saying, "I did not touch her, I promise you."
I'm defending myself over something that I haven't done.
Police agreed Keith Lewis didn't have a case to answer, and he was never charged over Parkinson's allegations. But Keith's family, his wife Robin and daughters, are still hurting.
I just feel this helplessness that I just don't understand. I want to scream at her and ask her, why would you ever do this to us? But I can't. I feel broken when I see someone that could do such a horrible thing to such a good person.
I hate what this has become, and reading through everything, I have concerns for physical and mental health.
It's the same question being asked by Dan Jones. In his daily letters from jail, he writes about his confusion, frustration, and despair.
I'm scared. I shouldn't be because I've done nothing at all. But there is a small percentage of me that tells me I'm fucked.
And there didn't seem to be any good news. Dan's parents were now faced with telling their son his time in jail while awaiting trial might be many more months.
And he sat there and not a word. He just had tears coming down his face, and I thought, what are we going to do? And I said to him, "Daniel, I have to ask you about your will." And because we knew it was dangerous, him being in there.
When Sarah Jane Parkinson escalated her claims of harassment by the Jones family, the case was handed over to the AFP's Criminal Division, Detective Sergeant Lisa Alexander.
And I believed her until the evidence started to show something different.
She was a godsend, an absolute godsend.
Without her, he'd probably still be inside.
Now under suspicion for lying about the crimes her husband allegedly committed, Detective Sergeant Lisa Alexander questions Sarah Jane Parkinson.
Can you tell me, in your own words, what your understanding of the caution is?
That I can choose if I say or do anything, and whatever I do or say can be used as evidence.
Yeah.
For the first time, Sarah Jane Parkinson's allegations were being scrutinised. And Parkinson didn't like it, saying so in text messages to her police confidant, Acting Sergeant Scott Corcoran, who is now no longer in charge of the case. In one, she wrote to Corcoran, "Lisa showed up at my work on Sunday and caused a bit of a scene. She is horrible, and I don't want to talk to her again." If Parkinson was rattled, it was for good reason. Lisa Alexander was scrupulous in her investigations.
And I believed her until the evidence started to show something different. There were a number of photos on Sarah's phone that I saw, and Sarah appeared to be very happy. During those dates, Dan was in jail. So I found that very difficult.
Hand on my heart, that was Daniel. I know it was Daniel. I recognised him.
You're saying that you drove past their house. Doesn't make any sense.
I know,
This is the actual audio of the police interview where Parkinson is being called to account for the raft of allegations she's made against the Jones family.
We put it to you, Sarah, that you reported it stolen, falsely accusing them of offence.
No.
Now, Parkinson was claiming a pattern of persistent harassment, threats and theft implicating Dan's parents, Ian and Michelle, and his brother, Andrew. They're allegations that will finally reveal her to be a liar.
I think it was just sheer desperation. Like, it's been a rough few years with Daniel.
Parkinson made many accusations, including that she was driven off the road and attacked by a man wielding a knife. The steak knife Parkinson claimed was used to attack her was her own.
We did a search warrant, and the set of 6 knives was only 5 knives. We had those knives later compared, and that was one of the set of 6.
ACT Police, Alyra speaking.
Hi, my name's Sarah Parkinson. My power was cut off before, but I had a lock on the power box, and that's gone now.
Parkinson also implicated the Jones family in multiple break-ins at her house.
Police Operations, Jane speaking.
Hi, my name's Sarah Parkinson. Last week, my house got broken into, and one of the things that was taken was my iPad.
Then she claimed her iPad had been stolen and that software indicated it was at the Jones house.
It's a bit of an ongoing thing at the moment. I'm giving evidence in a trial against my ex-partner, and his family's been harassing me, and the house has been broken into 8 times.
The lies kept coming. This time, Parkinson claimed that someone had broken into her car at work, probably the Jones family, she said. But CCTV footage showed Parkinson briefly leaving work and unlocking her own car to set up the story of a break-in.
On review of that footage, it showed that no one had broken into Sarah's car that day. We watched all the footage, and it was clear to me by the end of watching that footage that Sarah had lied. If she's lied to me, perhaps she's lied to the earlier investigators. My blood ran cold. I was horrified that that may be the case. Daniel was my issue then, so it was, she's lying to me. She's lied to me now on 4 occasions. There's probably an innocent person in jail. Someone had reported all of these fake crimes and blamed Daniel for all of them. And as far as I was concerned, and what the evidence showed, is he wasn't responsible for any of it. It didn't happen.
Lisa Alexander's case against Sarah Jane Parkinson was so compelling that the Department of Public Prosecutions in the ACT called for an emergency bail hearing. Dan, whom they'd so relentlessly pursued into jail, was now someone they desperately wanted out. And after 4.5 long months, Dan was released. For Dan Jones and his parents Ian and Michelle, there is no joy. With all charges against Dan dropped, the nightmare that's been inflicted upon them by Sarah Jane Parkinson is now laid bare. The years of fighting to prove Dan's innocence has quite literally destroyed them.
Daniel's lost his career, his reputation, his livelihood, his house. Michelle and I expended huge amounts of money, which resulted in, significantly contributed to our divorce after over 30 years of marriage. It's shattered any belief we've got in the police, the legal system, the judiciary, the DPP. It's destroyed our family. It has ruined us.
I think she's a lying, vindictive, cancerous human that should not be around other people at all.
I was a woman who could go bang, bang, got a question, bang, I've got an answer. You know, I was a professional. I was in a professional position. All that's gone. You know, my marriage is gone. And my family, you know, all I ever wanted in life was to have a nice little house with my family around me. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't think that was a lot to ask.
For 5 years, Parkinson vigorously fought the charges brought against her by Detective Lisa Alexander of falsely accusing Dan Jones of rape and abuse. But Parkinson finally pleaded guilty, admitting to the court she'd made it all up. She was sentenced to prison for 3 years and 1 month. At least 2 of those years will be spent behind bars. So, why did she do it? Well, according to the DPP, Parkinson was motivated by greed, the house and money she hoped to get when Dan was locked away for years.
She saw a comfortable family with some savings. And she wanted it. She almost got it. Except for Lisa Alexander, she didn't count on Lisa.
It's awful that anybody could do that to another person. I can't fathom what she did.
The fact that Sarah Jane Parkinson was, as the court described, a pathological liar is shocking enough. But the questions the Jones family want answered are, why was she able to cause so much damage? Why didn't police stop her earlier? And why didn't the DPP test the evidence police claimed they had?
Sarah, in my opinion, knew the system. There are many protections put in place for real victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And my opinion is that Sarah knew them and she abused them.
Dan was never guilty, but proving his innocence cost the Jones family more than $600,000 and everything they owned. It's money they should never have had to spend, and despite the family's pleas, it's money none of the authorities involved are willing to repay.
You know, obviously, without Mum and Dad's financial backing, then, you know, I'd be in jail, simple as that. So it's torn our family apart.
Sarah destroyed that family. It's awful what happened to the Joneses. I can't even imagine what it would be like. Dan didn't do anything to cause this.
Dan Jones is now living in Perth, as far from Canberra as he can possibly get. And remarkably, he's found love again with his new girlfriend, Bridget. But Dan's story has left them all with deep and lingering emotional scars, all caused by one person, Sarah Jane Parkinson.
I think if she ever came near my family again, God help her, stay away from my family.
Vicki Efandis was a middle-aged woman with a voracious appetite for money. This gold digger had 3 boyfriends and a trail of deceit behind her. But her most evil plan of all was to take the life and life savings of her most trusted companion. She preyed on lonely men.
Very cold, callous, calculating, completely motivated by greed.
Men looking for love.
He was a good person. It's very easy to like.
But for George Marcetta...
It's alleged that you placed the drug in George Marcetta's food that evening.
That's an accusation and a half, if anything, is an accusation.
There was no happy ever after.
What is your reason for murdering George Marcetta?
I won't comment because I didn't do it.
It wasn't the first time Vicki Efandis had preyed on the vulnerable, but this time she was determined to get everything. And the trusting George Marcetta happily allowed Vicki to take control of every aspect of his life.
From all accounts, George was head over heels in love with Vicki and he would do anything for her. He just did whatever she wanted.
Vicki Efandis portrayed herself as a kind, caring person, but she was a self-absorbed gold digger, a ruthless opportunist who preyed on older, lonely men.
She came across as a very kind, nice lady, but deep down she's really just a callous, cold-hearted killer.
George was in his mid-50s and ran a successful painting company when he employed 44-year-old Efandis to cook and clean for him.
I was going there, doing the washing, cleaning, everything, because someone, you know, like men don't do everything, you know.
Vicki was also claiming a disability pension, supposedly unable to work after a number of car accidents. But she had done her homework on George. and this was an opportunity she couldn't miss.
She actually went and visited his ex-wife and done a lot of research on him about his financial position and who had claim to his assets if she was to do something with him. They were actual words to the ex-wife.
Vicki soon took control of George's entire life, and no longer was she simply the hired help.
Was it a sexual relationship?
Yes.
Or it was?
Well, sexual was business. But no, we were just like a couple.
Was he happy to have a new girlfriend?
Oh, yeah. He was actually showing off with her photo on his mobile.
Do you think he was in love with her?
Yeah, yeah. He never actually spoke about anybody like he was talking about Vicki at the time.
Shopfitter Predrag Mikic met George Marcetta through work. Both born in Serbia, the men formed a solid bond. Predrag was surprised George fell for such a bossy woman, but was glad his friend of 15 years was happy.
He was a good person. It's very, I reckon, very easy to like. He was very funny, yeah, but he was a, like sort of big man, like a, like a teddy bear, but deep down, soft like a cotton.
And that was just how Vicki Afandis liked her men, soft, easily manipulated. Before George Marcetta, she'd fleeced 2 other vulnerable divorcees.
She had 3 ex-partners, all by the name of George. We'll call them George 1, 2 and 3 to make it easier. George 1, she fell pregnant to him very quickly, and he approached Vicki and asked for a DNA test to prove that, or disprove that he was the father, and she wouldn't allow it to happen.
When George number 1 refused to pay Vicki's daughter's school fees, he didn't hear from her again.
Then soon after the baby was born, she left him and went on with George number 2.
George number 2 took on the role as the father.
George number 2 took on the role from basically the moment the child was born, and look, it's possible that he was the father, we don't know.
George number 2 is taxi driver George Lakisiotis. Vicki took up with him in 1985, and they had an on and off relationship for years. George Marcetta may have been George number 3, but George Lakisiotis, the taxi driver, was far from gone. Even though he paid Vicki a settlement of $120,000, he was still seeing her on the sly. But she said she'd soon be back to look after him, and with all George Marcetta's money.
Entirely mine.
And within a couple of short years, Vicki Afandis had persuaded George Marcetta to sign over all his major assets, even his beloved Jaguar.
When Vicki met George, he had a house in Dandenong. Vicki convinced George to sell that house and move over closer to where she was.
The couple bought George's new Belfield house together. He contributed $100,000 and Vicki $80,000. But she demanded the house be solely in her name. Gold digger Vicki Afandis wasn't interested in building a future with George Marcetta. She wanted to kill him and take over his estate. Vicki Afandis had the house, and now she took control of George's business. She convinced him to shut down his existing company, Universe Painting Services, and reopen it as Universal High Tech. Vicki was appointed co-director and her teenage daughter company secretary.
He wanted me to be in the business.
In what capacity?
As his partner, as his, he wanted me to be in the business. How can I say it to you?
What was your official title in the business?
He was director and I was director. That's it.
Put it to you that you convinced George Marcetta to cancel his last will and testament, of which George Marcetta's daughter was the sole beneficiary. What do you say to that?
That I told him to cancel? No.
And why did that occur?
George had a fight with his daughter. They weren't talking.
George had a fantastic relationship with his daughter. His daughter's a lovely, gentle person, as George was. He was a very happy, gentle person. It was all to do with this will. She wanted him to cancel his will.
Now all she had to do was kill him and she'd inherit the lot. But first Vicki needed a fall guy. And that fall guy was one of George's friends, Ivan Bassett.
You did make a report to police, is that correct? In relation to a burglary.
Vicki tried to frame Bassett to make out there was bad blood between him and George by staging a fake robbery at George's house, then blaming his mate.
And you agree that burglary did not in fact occur?
No, I didn't say that.
No, I'm asking.
That the burglary didn't occur.
She said that she'd seen Ivan Bassett driving away with a trailer full of George Marcetta's tools, and she'd actually physically seen him leave the crime scene.
Having cast suspicion on Ivan Bassett, Vicki put her plan to murder George into action. On the 8th of September 2004, she tidied up the house, then cooked George his favourite meal, pork rolls and noodles, heavily lacing it with the sedative Serapax.
It's alleged that you placed the drug in George Marcetta's food that evening. What do you say to that?
That I placed... Oh... Why would I... Oh, no. Why would I do that? Oh... No comment. Jesus, that's an accusation and a half, if anything is an accusation.
Vicki later told police she went home after cooking the meal and texted George goodnight. She claimed that after he replied, she went to bed at about 11:30. But she was lying. She was actually at George's home and she sent and received both text messages. George was incapable of anything. He was in bed, unconscious. Vicki now prepared to burn him alive.
But I'll put it to you that in preparation to burn the house and murder George Marcetta, you've spread newspaper throughout the floor. What do you say to that?
I'm not going to comment on accusations like that. No, I'm not going to comment. If I didn't do something like that, Jesus. No.
Well, did you do that?
No, I deny.
Vicki then drove home and got into bed. At about 3 a.m, she received a call from one of George's neighbours and returned to the burning house. Vicki told police at the scene that George's mate Ivan had murdered him. It was a monumental mistake.
No one had told you that there was a deceased person in the house at that time when you were saying that Ivan Bassett has murdered George Marcetta. What do you say to that?
I don't understand it. I don't understand.
Well, why would you be saying that Ivan Bassett killed George Marcetta before anyone's actually told you that there was a body in the house?
Early the next morning, George's best mate, Predrag Mikic, received a call from Vicki telling him the house had burnt down.
She goes, George is gone. I said, where did he go? She goes, he died. I was just trying to picture George in that moment because I was very close to him.
Vicki's lack of emotion was deeply unsettling. Even at George's funeral, she didn't appear to be upset.
My impressions were that she was just a very calculated, cold-hearted, evil person.
George Marcetta died in a house fire lit by his partner, Vicki Afandis. And while police found Vicki's behaviour highly suspicious, there was one crucial detail that had them stumped. A neighbour had spotted a late-model Ford Falcon in George's driveway on the night of the fire. They needed to find the owner of that car.
We just door-knocked every car hire company within a massive radius and come across it.
Police finally found the mystery car at a rental dealership. Vicki, who had access to 3 other cars, had secretly hired it 2 days before the murder and returned it just hours after the fire. She even asked the attendant to rip up the rental agreement. Fortunately, they didn't, and it was to be another damning piece of evidence against Vicki Afandis.
No other person, other than yourself, was aware that you had possession of that hire car from your car. What do you say to that?
No one was aware.
Nobody else was aware.
What difference? What does that? What does that mean? What does it make? Does it make? Do I have to advertise the fact that I'm hiring a car if something gets broken down? I mean, do you have to do that? I don't understand. I don't understand. I didn't conceal it. It was in the driveway.
The police now had a strong case against Vicki Afandis. Detectives charged her with George Marcetta's murder. And while Vicki was in prison awaiting trial, there was another breakthrough. She confessed to fellow prisoners.
I knew nothing about the murder. I don't read newspapers. I never saw anything on television. What I know came from Vicki's mouth.
Anne was Vicki's cellmate at the correction centre, and her evidence would prove crucial at the trial.
I says, well, did you do it? And she hesitated and she says, Well, we done it. It was all arranged. I tried not to show her my shock, my face, because I'm thinking, my God, I'm sleeping next to a murderer. Then she told me that she was sick of people, George lending money to other people, and it was all about Vicki. And control and arrogance, very arrogant. It had to be her way or the highway.
With Anne's new evidence and a compelling circumstantial case, Vicki Afandis was found guilty of George Marcetta's murder. She was sentenced to 24 years with a non-parole period of 20 years.
Today, justice was served for my father. He was a good man, very hardworking, loved and respected by all his family.
I've never met anyone like Vicki Afandis in my life, never. She's evil, terrible. She's where she belongs.
And in killing George Marcetta, I used to gain all of his assets. The house at 140 Liberty Parade, the business of Universe High-Tech Construction and Interior, and other chattels and possessions of George Marcetta. What do you say to that?
I won't comment, really, I won't comment.
Just how many people fell victim to Vicki Afandis, she's not saying. But during her trial, police gave evidence about the suspicious deaths of several elderly people in her care.
I would describe her, from my knowledge of her, being very callous, cold, calculated, manipulative, and just completely driven by greed. I think George Marcetta was just a cash cow to her. George loved her, yes, and she abused that love.